Okay, ready? I'll let people wander in a little bit. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks everyone for being here today. My name is Anushah Hossain, and this is a joint talk with Debbie Anderson, who's sitting in the front row, and she'll come up during the Q&A to answer all of your questions. So this talk is about the Script Encoding Initiative, or SEI for short, and it's a project based out of the University of California, Berkeley, that has helped over 100 historic and minority scripts get into Unicode. So this work takes a really unique set of skills. SEI has the position of, in academia, what we call a boundary actor. It's someone that translates different stakeholders' perspectives and interests to each other so that they can cooperate. And this is really important, unique work. So over the last 20 years, this important boundary crossing work has been done by Debbie. And today I'm sharing kind of the unlikely story of how this happened, pointing out the challenges and successes over this time. So I'll start off with an overview for about 20 minutes, and then, like I said, Debbie will come up and answer your more specific questions. So just a little about me before we begin. My name's Anushah. I'm actually a historian. I'm not a programmer or a linguist. And I was previously a student at UC Berkeley, and now I'm a postdoc across the bay at Stanford. And over the last few years, I've been writing a history of Unicode. And it was through that work that I met Debbie, met a bunch of people in this room, and started to learn more about how all this worked. So through my exposure to Debbie, I've borne witness to the breadth and depth of her work. I don't personally have the depth of experience that she has, but I've been starting to dip my toes in, and I'm going to be taking over a lot of it as Debbie keeps trying to retire over the next year. So near the end, I'll talk a little bit about what I have in mind for the next few years of SEI. Okay, so what is SEI? As I mentioned, it's a project run out of UC Berkeley's linguistics department, where Debbie has worked as a researcher for the last 20 years. SEI works to prepare proposals for the encoding of new characters in the Unicode standard and the harmonized ISO 10646 text standard. So SEI is really remarkable for a couple of reasons. Many reasons, but at least a few. It holds a really unique position as an academic member in the Unicode consortium, bringing an independent scholarly voice in a space that on the surface level is full of commercial interests. It's also found a way to find funding and hold space for work that is often hard to describe and difficult for institutions to recognize and reward. This is really a key point. So to some degree, SEI has been a labor of love, as it's not obviously supported by incentive structures in universities or really in businesses. Yet somehow SEI has been extremely productive, having gotten over 100 historic and minority scripts encoded in Unicode with an outstandingly minimal amount of resources. And this continues to come with challenges that I'll walk through. So I'm gonna flesh out these points a little bit more now, and hopefully shed some light on Unicode itself and the nature of script digitization broadly. Talking about SEI, but I think it'll be relatable points for all of you. So starting with its history and unique position. So I think some of this Unicode history is familiar to a lot of you. When Unicode launched in 1991, it had a big mandate. It was trying to achieve as wide coverage as possible, stick to certain design philosophies for efficiency and consistency, and get buy-in from as large a base as possible. So these priorities or principles showed up in a lot of policies in the Unicode standard, things like round-trip backwards compatibility, which means bringing in existing standards and making it as easy as possible to comply with them. One of Unicode's key principles of encoding only characters, not glyphs. This is related to efficiency and consistency, and the stability policy, which means you don't change anything once it's in Unicode, as a guarantee to businesses that if you build on top of Unicode, and then it's not going to break down somewhere without you knowing about it. And so the priorities for the first decade of Unicode were to cover all of the national and commercially important scripts, which it did generally manage to do by Unicode 3.0 around, released in 1999. But you can see how these early priorities shaped encoding orders. So early vision documents for the Unicode standard didn't even anticipate being able to cover smaller scripts like the ones that SCI now does. The ones that are politically and economically important were at the top of the list. So this is from a document written by Joe Becker in 1988 called Unicode 88. It's really fascinating reading, but it explicitly shows that what's most important for Unicode is the scripts that have the highest percentage of world GNP, at least in theory. This is another snippet from that same document, and it says, at this point, Unicode was intended to be fixed with 16-bit, and that changed over time, but it didn't seem like there would be any room for modern minority scripts or historic scripts. I think there's a line in there. Yeah, Unicode gives higher priority to ensuring the utility for the future than to preserving past antiquities, aims for the instance of the characters published in modern text. So you can see that it was a little bit of an uphill battle for the ones that SCI works on to make their way into Unicode. So it's in that context that we should think about SCI's contribution. That's my point. So even with the openness that Unicode did have to adding new scripts to the standard, heading into the new millennium, with more code space, the priorities kind of handled, resources were still nonetheless driven in part by these interests that I've mentioned. And this is practical because encoding scripts is incredibly resource intensive and not all of them can be completed at once. So SCI exists to help those scripts that don't necessarily hold economic and political power to make their way into Unicode to actually provide the resources that not many others have the time to do. And this work involves the following. So before a script even gets to be considered by Unicode, it needs to be documented. That's a historic script, or there needs to be proof that it's in active use by the community and has a standardized written form that has widespread acceptance. So this is really, really hard to do, as we can maybe talk about in the Q&A. And this graphic, by the way, is from a nonprofit group, an SCI partner called Translation Commons, that I think Craig Cornelius also worked on. It's a great document called Zero to Digital, and it goes through some of the pertinent questions that come up even before implementation. Then after that, after you have a script that's ready to be in Unicode, it has all of the other kind of real world conditions in place. Oops. It's often a matter of gathering evidence to document the writing system and its acceptance among scholars or the language community in a way that Unicode understands. And that type of proof can come from publications in the script, not about the script, but kind of spontaneous publications, street signs, educational materials, and providing all of this requisite material for Unicode Script Ad Hoc Committee and the UTC, the Unicode Technical Committee, can be a challenge. So that's really what SCI is positioned to do. When you submit a proposal to Unicode, you have to fill out this kind of deceptively simple form, but each line requires a lot of, maybe it's not even deceptively simple, Craig's crossing his head. But in particular, there are sections like this, number 6, where it asks for references, and that might be pages and pages of material. So SCI works with communities to get that all together. Generally, this process works out best when the request for a script comes from the community itself. So even with confident advocates preparing a proposal, like I said, with the appropriate evidence, that Unicode needs to make a judgment on the correctness and necessity of the additions is difficult. So W does this in partnership with community members, researchers, technology implementers. At times, this requires bringing together experts to agree on a standard, as in these meetings. Just a sample of which are on screen. Or funding them to compile the documentation and then representing their consensus in internal Unicode meetings so that issues can be resolved efficiently and compassionately. Many of the scripts that SCI has worked with have been politically contentious, and so SCI also plays this diplomatic role in mediating conflicts between opposing parties as best as it can. So a little bit about SCI, how it got started in the first place. Debbie herself came into this work in a familiar kind of scratch your own itch way, common in software, I think. After her PhD in linguistics, she was working as editor of the Indo-European Studies Bulletin, the sample up here, a publication out of UCLA, which included articles on many ancient Indo-European languages. As part of the project to put the publication online in the late 1990s, it became clear that she would have trouble making text available for an article with old italic characters, because as she discovered, they weren't in Unicode. So this led to her learning about Unicode. She met with Ken Whistler, an early Unicode member, in his Sybase office at the time, and he pulled out the Unicode standard from his shelf, probably Unicode version 3, and suggested that she read it. Fun reading. She then reached out to Rick McGowan, the then Unicode vice president. They met in a coffee shop in San Jose, and he encouraged Debbie to start this project at UC Berkeley to support work on lesser used scripts. She also contacted the person working on the old italic proposal, Michael Everson, another familiar name, I think, to people in this room, whom she knew from her graduate days at UCLA. So Debbie worked with him and other experts on the old italic proposal. This led to her attending UTC, Unicode Technical Committee workshops in the early 2000s at UC Berkeley. There are a bunch of these old photos if you go digging through the Unicode website. It's a treat. And the initial focus of SEI was to get these historic Indo-European scripts into Unicode, Old Italic, Aegean scripts, Linear B, separate syllabary, and so that they could be interchanged online. Although Debbie's PhD work was in Indo-European languages, it soon became clear to her that there was no other voting member participating in Unicode that focused on modern minority languages either. So that's when SEI expanded its scope to any lesser used script. So early documents in this vein in 2002 were Old Tiki, and in 2003, Balinese and Unco. A major impetus for starting this project was that the Unicode Consortium voting members were from private companies for the most part, and not a group that represented linguists and user communities who employ lesser used scripts in their work and communication. This is from 2006. I actually couldn't find an earlier one, and now the website's changed, but you can see how the mix is mostly these tech companies. You have some other interesting members, national and state governments, and then UC Berkeley as the only academic member up until very recently. Having an academic participating was also very important to ensure that proposals had been carefully vetted for accuracy and completeness, and to ensure that users and experts were involved in the process, as Debbie came to hear that there were cases where they didn't feel like they had been consulted. So as you can see, SEI has held this very unique position between user and expert communities and the Unicode standards makers themselves, advocating for scripts that would otherwise have a difficult time finding a footing. The fact that Debbie was able to hold this boundary position is quite remarkable because, like I was saying earlier, funding structures in universities and corporations are not geared towards supporting this type of work. So as Debbie recounted to me in the beginning, getting funding for the project was a huge challenge, both to pay for work on proposals and later for membership in Unicode. Initial funding for SEI came from a contact based on her work as editor of the UCLA Bulletin. This funding was then complemented by UNESCO funding, with funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH, and then later even from Google. Getting membership in the Unicode Consortium for a university was challenging, in part because it's difficult to identify which office in a university to approach. They're these complex bureaucratic creatures. And even after you find someone, you have to convince them why paying the membership fee to Unicode is a worthy investment, that it impacts faculty publications, scholarly communication and research, and the development of teaching materials. Over the years, Debbie eventually decided that it was more expedient to use her grant money towards membership fees and explain to NEH, instead of UC Berkeley, the value of participating in the development of the standard. Since NEH's Division of Preservation and Access in its research and development program supports standards, thankfully this wasn't a difficult sell. Still, having more universities, colleges, and other educational institutions involved in Unicode is a task that should be striven for in both of our views. Part of the problem may be the cost, which for some public universities is an issue. Getting recognition from scholars and building support there was also difficult, especially around historic scripts. Initially, so this is in the early 2000s before Unicode has gained majority adoption. Explaining to scholars why they needed their characters was a challenge. Most authors preferred to use their non-standard fonts in publication and in coursework. This is fine for printing, but did not make it easy to exchange any of these texts over email or the web, for example. As editor of the Indo-European publication, Debbie had to deal with many of these non-standard fonts, a process she recounts as very frustrating. This has changed in recent years, as publishers and grant agencies are actually requiring written materials use Unicode-based fonts. So the importance of having the needed characters in Unicode with the font is more readily apparent. It's also been difficult to find people with the interest and time to learn about Unicode and pursue work on a proposal. Work on Unicode does not generally come as part of an academic position, so it requires one to seek outside funding, like Debbie did. And because Unicode proposals are not widely understood as academic papers, the research that goes into them is often not recognized for tenure, for example, things that matter for academics. For modern language communities, it likewise took some time before an understanding of what Unicode was, or more concretely, how it could help users in online communication before that was understood. In Africa, it's Debbie's impression that Unko and later Adlam were instrumental in conveying what it meant to be able to write in one's preferred script on computers and mobile devices. And this has led to other communities coming to lobby to have their preferred script on computers and devices. As in Africa, several people in India have also contacted SCI to get their script, especially if it's one that they've created onto devices. So over time, Unicode has come to be understood as the way to get a script onto computers and devices. And SCI no longer has this challenge of explaining why it's important or needed, but it was something that was the primary part of its work in the early days. That uphill battle has been replaced by other challenges, however. So I'll talk through those a bit. So, like I said, SCI has a truly impressive record of getting over 100 scripts into the standard. And this number doesn't even account for the steady stream of patient, careful advice that Debbie provides every interested party that reaches out to her or Unicode. So there are a lot of capacity-related challenges that I'll talk through now that I think are important for us to understand to fully appreciate the labor that goes into SCI. So to carry out its work, SCI has relied on linguists, especially those that Debbie met through her work on Indo-European and through her colleagues at the Department of Linguistics at Berkeley. Participating in academic conferences has been helpful for her to expand her network. This is how she met Stefan Boms, who worked with Andrew Glass on Brahmi, and made contacts that led to the work on Proto-Cuneiform, Mayan, and alchemical symbol proposals. Attending ISO meetings has also allowed the opportunity to engage with users of minority languages and scripts in East Asia, in particular China. But even after sourcing experts to help work on proposals, the work continues. So when SCI was working with just a small handful of scripts, it was easy to keep track of all the proposals that are somewhere along the process. But now that number is rather large. There are about 40 scripts right now that are somewhere in the pipeline. So staying informed on all of them is a difficult task. There are questions like constantly that you have to keep track of. Is more information needed with examples? Has the proposal been vetted? Have the outstanding issues been addressed? Is the user community involved all along this way? Waiting to hear back from experts and users is one of the main reasons for delays, particularly since the more difficult scripts, such as Mayan hieroglyphs, and the less well-known scripts. Also, since over 100 scripts have been approved and published in Unicode, the user communities often need assistance in getting the components that come after Unicode ready to go so that they can actually use their script on devices. And for this, we're trying to direct them to the appropriate contact. This can be a Translation Commons for keyboards, for example, or ANRT for fonts. On the government funding side, NIH has been very supportive of work on SCI, but funding typically comes in 2-year grants. And to date has been for proposals mostly, even though like I said, we need additional support for fonts, keyboards, implementation and software to help long-term with the user communities. But more importantly, this 2-year timeframe of funding is often too short. Work on proposals, particularly for lesser known scripts, takes much longer than 2 years. So a longer term funding solution, kind of institutional change, would be helpful. And then all of this work is further complicated by the fact that it's now become apparent that some earlier proposals did not have enough research done into the broader picture of related scripts in a region. So some early encoding decisions in hindsight would have been made differently today. Rejong Debbie notes, for example, should have taken into consideration a broader range of scripts. In addition, some encoding approaches have changed over time, which has been frustrating to some proposal authors who reasonably expect consistency. For example, now printed examples from more than one source are required, but this wasn't spelled out earlier. So where does all of this leave us? Some takeaways from Debbie. Her first is to keep engaging with communities, both those whose scripts have been newly accepted and older encoded historic and modern minority scripts. For those scripts that are still not encoded or relatively new in Unicode, there is still some hesitancy in some quarters to rely on Unicode and fonts based on Unicode, particularly if the scholars were not directly involved in the work of getting the script into Unicode. So a useful approach that Debbie has employed that we hope to continue is to ensure well-respected experts are involved in the encoding process, even to just review a proposal or comment on glyph shapes. This gives some legitimacy to the project. Also, if possible, we call to encourage scholars who are involved in the process to attend conferences and discuss and demonstrate fonts. So this was done by a postdoc recently who showed Egyptian hieroglyph font development at the University of Chicago. The steps beyond getting the script into Unicode still need to be better explained and have more guidance provided. How to create fonts, keyboards, get it supported in software. Even a fairly successful script in being implemented, such as Adlam, still has issues in getting fully operational. For example, not being supported on Facebook Lite or Messenger Lite, which are used more often in Africa. For our unencoded scripts, we should continue working with contacts to get information from experts and communities, realizing that many different factors may be at play. The community of people interested in encoding the Loma script, for example, is spread across different countries, so it's difficult for them to come together. So that's the type of work that SEI can help do. And they need to decide upon a repertoire before a proposal can even proceed. And then, of course, we should lobby the companies we work at and speak to support the work of SEI and work on minority scripts. Our impression is that supporting scripts is dependent upon large numbers of users in order to justify budgets. However, a particular script may be very important for its historical, cultural, or religious importance and may only affect a relatively small number of users. Highlighting the importance of lesser used scripts is continually needed beyond the metrics of just users. And then we should encourage educational institutions to join Unicode and get involved so they can have a voice at the table. So a little bit from my perspective as an academic who's slowly falling into encoding work, I see a few major medium-term challenges that universities could take on. So one of the largest challenges I think facing SEI and Unicode in general is building a fresh cohort of individuals interested in this extremely niche but fascinating interdisciplinary work. We've heard from employees from tech companies that new hires often come in with little exposure or familiarity with Unicode, even on the tech side. So in my view, universities can take on this challenge by developing curricula and creating opportunities for students to dip their toes in this world. It can be through introductory classes to language technologies. Our colleague Isabel Zog did this at Columbia, and it was very successful. Or creating research assistant roles to do small bits of research and writing up. And the talk after this one by Joel is on the Unicode Guide to Internationalization, which could be another useful resource for university curricula. And then towards revitalizing the entire SCI network and compiling better documentation of the encoding process, Encoding Plus, we're working on building what we're calling a collective archive. This is basically a blog of experiences from the 100+ scripts that went through SCI, asking them to detail what it took to get their script supported in digital space. So we can do this through oral histories, through interviews, through their own write-ups, and it'll be hopefully a useful resource for everyone moving forward. And finally, as a qualitative researcher myself, I feel best positioned to absorb and translate SCI's story for public audiences through channels like this talk, but also more journalistic stories. As I've shared, one of the challenges we face is communicating exactly why this work is hard, time-intensive, resource-intensive. So one of my biggest goals this coming year is to build language around this, to talk about the niche work that you all do so that other people can understand it. And that's towards the dual goals of funneling more resources into digitizing the long tail, then also nurturing that new cohort of contributors. I just want to end with what I thought was a very touching line from an exchange I had with Debbie, that though it took some time to follow the Unicode lingo and understand the encoding process when she was starting off, she realized soon that she had found her tribe. And I suspect it's this human connection that propelled much of her work over the last 20 plus years. What I hope I've outlined here is that SCI is a very special kind of institution that sits between several larger ones, between industry and conventional academia, between grassroots communities. I think it's in all of our interests to create the conditions for more of these in-between initiatives to exist and support them as best we can. But at the same time, we can recognize that often it does come down to passionate individuals who are moved to do the work like this. Thanks. Debbie, you can come up if you want. Only if you want. Questions?
Yep. Besides Adlam, what has been the most satisfying script that you've helped encode?
Good question.
Maybe Encode. I have to think about the historic scripts. It's just longer uptake from scholars on the historic scripts. That's all.
So you were saying there are about 40 scripts in the pipeline. Can you share like an overview of where these scripts are coming from, and some examples of those scripts?
Where they're coming from? Is that what you're asking?
Which part of the world?
Well, this is on the SEI quarterly liaison report. There's a list of all the scripts there. Many from India, a lot, I would say primarily historic scripts, actually, and many being done by Ajman Pandi. So it's a variety, but I can send you a link. You can take a look at the liaison report because it lists them there.
Yeah, the SCI website has a page called Progress, and it has a table of everything that is on the docket.
I already asked this question of the Berry brothers yesterday. I kind of want the answer from the other side, which is these days for a lot of people are inventing new writing systems for reasons of cultural identity, escaping from colonialism, just general having joy in their own language and writing. What kind of advice do you have for people attempting to do this?
Well, it's going to take a long time. You've got to be very patient, willing to stick with it. I just give them that kind of thing. It can be done, but you got to stick with it and be willing to work with, the standards committees. If you're asked for something, try and get it back promptly. Be open-minded. Sometimes people have very closed ideas on particular aspects that delays things. So, just keep working at it, but it can take a while.
Thank you.
I want to follow up on that question. Since there are a lot of disparate groups trying to do that and have, especially in the indigenous communities, getting their languages digitized, maybe they shouldn't all be working kind of in the dark and separately. Is there a place where we can make a community out of these groups so that they can share from the experiences of the people who have been successful, maybe learn some lessons from people who had difficulty, and support each other in their work? Is there something like that, or maybe we should create something like that?
I don't think there's anything right now. I did create some templates to guide people in the process, but maybe this is one feature that some of your stories might be able to, highlight, like if you interviewed the Berry brothers, so get some more input from them. But right now, there isn't anything, although Manish has an idea about, and Ben about writing something, so creating something.
I think writing things out on a blog basically will help towards that, because I think people aren't aware of each other. Different communities aren't aware that they're all like living in the same space. They know on some level, but actually seeing all the details and saying, okay, this script went through, had similar challenges to what I'm facing right now. Maybe we should connect. I think that goes part of the way towards what you're saying.
So the problem is for those groups to find the blog and to find others, right? That doesn't happen. So, and some governments like Canada support that have initiatives to make things happen within their market, but might be harder for other communities to do that.
So maybe real life gatherings.
Yeah, maybe we follow that up.
Yeah.
This is for Anushah. As a historian, what do you see in the Unicode and script encoding processes that have made them successful versus the many attempts at standards that don't go anywhere?
Oh, great question. So I actually think Unicode is this incredibly successful standard and standards body, because even though it had very strict principles at the start and nominally still does, they adjusted over time. Like, I feel like the interpretation changed over time as leadership heard back from user communities. So the case study that I really look at in my research is Bangla and kind of index scripts more broadly that were encoded with certain design principles taken from ISKI, propelled by the Indian national government in the 80s and early 90s. And these, just taken as they were very difficult for implementers to make work without bugs. And Unicode kept hearing back from users and implementers that the model behind Unicode or ISKI isn't quite working. So I think the principles have changed over time, and that's something that you don't always see, but it's what has made Unicode more successful, I would say.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bob from Google. SEI been doing tremendous work, so thank you for all the great work you've been doing. And I follow up on Tex's question and following up on your comment about full stack. We've seen a few successes like the Berry Brothers of Adlin. We've seen the Cherokee Nation have really great success. And I think providing them some information may be good, but even passionate people aren't going to have the same skill set the Berry Brothers have or the Cherokee Nation has had. So what role do you see SEI and Unicode Consortium of actually helping them other than just giving them advice? I mean, do you see you playing an active role or the Unicode Consortium to play an active role? But I think we need, as to Texas' point, I think a lot of groups aren't going to be able to do what the Berry Brothers did. And so how do we actually help them?
Okay. So what I've done is to generally, particularly groups that are not, don't have anyone within their group who's very Unicode aware and tech savvy, is to try and find a proposal author who already knows what the groups need, is to use them to work with the user community. So that's basically what I've done, is to help find someone like initially Michael Everson helped, and then afterwards Neil Patel has also helped him out. So, reputable people who can assist groups that don't have the skills.
I'll add, there are some other groups that help as well. Translation Commons is reaching out and also has a place where on their website groups can submit a form saying they need help. And although the Script Encoding Initiative can help with getting scripts into Unicode, we're creating keyboards for groups so that they can type, and we're also trying to match them up with other groups that can help with, or other experts that can help with terminology definition and some of the other things that are necessary to digitize a platform. You can look at translationcommons.org.
Hi, I don't necessarily have a question. I just wanted to comment and express our gratitude for, because I know, for example, for Adlam, I don't know if we would have been where we are today without SEI, the help that they provided early on, and all of the guidance, Unicode, you guys being, for example, advocates for us. And I think that's very helpful because sometimes it's hard to get, when you are starting to get your message across, to get heard by these big companies. I know we've been very lucky to have met Craig and Andrew Glass from Microsoft. They've been very helpful, but I think you guys play a very important role, because at the beginning, it's really hard, because there is sometimes a lot of doubt, and coming, across people like you or SEI can be very helpful for people like us who've never, because when we started, we didn't even know about Unicode. We're not aware of, and we were struggling even to, when we found out and how to even put the proposal together and get it through Unicode, and you guys helped with all of that. So we wanted to be thankful, express our gratitude, and tell you guys there are millions of people in Africa, Fulanis, who, whether they use Adlam or don't, they're very grateful for what you guys did for us. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. At one point you mentioned that many of the scripts you're working with, or the languages, you mentioned they're politically contentious. I was just curious, like, if you could give a better example, or like maybe clear that up, like how?
If I wasn't on the screen here, I could come over and tell you some. But,
Shut off the recording.
yeah, let's see. Well, we did
Spill the tea.
problem with the name for what now is Newa. We had a problem with the name, and in that case, the community wanted a particular name, and through email communication, it was not working out. So myself and Peter Constable traveled to Nepal in Kathmandu and met them, and really talk to them and work with them. And so we were able to come up with a solution, which is Newa. That was an example. There's some others, but I don't want to be on the recording. Anyway, so there are others.
One more for both of you. As a former academic, I know that there's never any politics in universities. Sarcasm. But could we put together a mini curriculum for interdisciplinary groups within universities that would include business schools, as well as computer science departments, as well as linguistics departments, so they would see the value in being able to represent languages for all their interests? Have we considered that?
I think that's a really great idea. Maybe that's something Anushah, the next generation at Berkeley, can help push. Even within the Department of Linguistics, it's kind of like, oh, Debbie, she works on fonts. Well, not exactly. I don't really work. Anyway, it's not really well understood. Even my own background in Indo-European at UCLA, we never really got into writing systems as a topic. Oftentimes we did work with transliteration and transcription, but I had learned cuneiform and Devanagari. So, I think that would be a really good idea, and perhaps the next generation can help make it come about. So,
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and it is something that I hope to help develop. So one of the classes that I think is a great model is Isabel Zog's one in Columbia, and she did a cross-listed course between comparative literature and computer science. So like Debbie was saying in linguistics, you think it would be a great fit, but there is, I think rating systems are more marginalized within the fields of linguistics, but a lot of people in comparative literature, they're working with transcripts. They kind of can see perhaps more easily the direct applications of Unicode. So I think that's kind of an obvious interdisciplinary partnership. But you mentioned business schools and others. I think down the line, that would be very interesting. Should we call it?
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
We're out of time, but Anusha and Debbie will be here to answer all your questions. So let's give them a hand.